Welcome to Dive Deep, where we recap the Sunday message and just take a deeper look at what's being shared. And my name is Cameron. I am one of your creative directors here at Christ Wesleyan. I'm here with Pastor Eddie. So neither Pastor Mike or Pastor Brandon are here. We're filling in again, but we just wrapped up our series Overflow.
Yeah.
Talking about giving. Man, I feel like every week of the series was very challenging, because it's hitting you where it hurts, which is in your wallet.
That's right.
So, Eddie, what's your thoughts been just week after week talking about generosity?
Right. Well, I mean, I think it's an interesting thing because though the modern church shies away a lot from talking about this, Jesus did not keep his mouth shut on it, right?
Oh, right.
Like,
yeah.
It was something that he addressed and brought up, but it still brings a lot of criticism because you get some people that are going, yeah, it's about time they talk to people about their tithes, and then you get others that are like, I can't believe that they would ask me to do this.
Yeah. Or it's all the church wants to talk about is money. They want your money.
That's right. Yeah. I overheard someone the other day say every year they take a whole month and do this. I was like, well, I think the last time that we did the Blessed Life, the Blessed Life was like in Pastor Arley's time. It was like over a decade ago, right?
Yeah, it was a long time ago. Actually, we went back through the archives before we did this series just to kind of just to see, and I believe it was like 2014.
So there
you go, 10 years ago.
A decade ago.
Yeah.
So not saying we haven't talked about it since then, but
yeah.
it can feel like it because that kind of stigma is out there. But I loved it. I love it because generosity is, key to the Christian life, right?
Yeah.
Like it is out of a generous heart, out of God's grace and mercy, that we are able to have a relationship with God at all through Jesus. Mm-hmm. And just that recognition that everything that we have is given to us by God, and that generosity comes out of a glad and giving heart back to Him.
Yeah. Something that really stuck with me from Sunday was Brandon shared about how Christ himself is a generous gift to us from God, which kind of blew my mind when he was talking about it. And then he went on to share about how we might be the type of people to say oh, well, if someone held a gun to my head and said do you believe in God, would you renounce him in that moment? And I think we like to think of ourselves as yeah, of course we would not do that. You know, we would stand for our faith, but yet are we willing to be a martyr in that way when it comes to our wallets and our finances on a day-to-day basis? And that hit me real hard. I was just ooh, man.
Yeah, that one-time difficult decision versus the day-to-day small decisions that we make throughout the day. It's oh, well, I don't have enough resources to be able to tithe 10%, something like that, but I can buy a $6 coffee every day. Or, that's a big challenge.
Yeah. So we've wrapped up this series. Every week of the series, Brandon has reminded us of the 90-day tithe challenge. So if you haven't, just a reminder on that, basically the challenge is just do it. Commit to tithing 10% on a weekly basis for 90 days and just wait and see what God does.
That's right.
And if you don't feel if you don't feel spiritually fulfilled by what has happened over that course of the 90 days, we'll return that money to you. That is the promise that Brandon has made, as just to kind of lead people into tithing. So a reminder and a plug for that. But I kind of want to talk about practicals of what we're supposed to do with it.
Sure.
Maybe the call is to do the challenge. Maybe the call is just to take one step of faithfulness. What are those kinds of steps that we can take?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to my mind, just as you were talking about that, is how you structure your budget in general, right? So a practical thing is, it is difficult if you continue to live your life the way that it already has been lived, and then say, oh, well, let me take 10% at the very end and try to find this to give. It doesn't quite work like that.
Like if you're not being responsible at the front end.
That's right. And so if you're actually taking through a healthy exercise that is eye-opening, is just to write down all the things that you spend your money on.
Oh, that sounds super convicting, Eddie.
And it's whoa, okay. For a lot of us, there's a lot more room in there than what we would like to realize or recognize. But it does take a sacrifice initially when you're moving into this lifestyle that you haven't had before. Whereas myself, I don't think it's news to anyone that pastors don't make a lot of money. But I remember when I was just coming out of college, I'd just gotten married. I had a car and a credit card payment from bad financial decisions while I was a college student and making poor choices. And had those payments, had the car payment, and was a newly married person trying to figure out how to survive. And then all of a sudden I'm working at a church and I've got a job and I'm like tithing. We had no money. We had a mattress on the floor. Someone had bought us a rice cooker. And I had a $20 dresser that I had off Craigslist. We didn't have enough money to go to the laundromat, so we snuck into our local university over at our friend's house, and we literally used their laundry machine on the facilities there for free for about an entire year while we were working through. But we operated out of a 90%. I mean, and even when there was times where our meal consisted of rice and a bag of curry tuna that we bought from Trader Joe's for $1.32.
There you go.
Like that was our meal. And we look back on that now and you can go, okay, yeah, that was the struggle. That was hard. We didn't have a microwave for a long time. So when we had to reheat food, it always had to go back into a pan, We didn't have a television. We didn't have a couch. We didn't have a dining room table. But we look back on those times and we're like, man, that was awesome.
And it would have been easy for you to make excuses not to do it.
Absolutely.
Like anyone would have looked at your situation and been like, yeah, it's okay. Like this is the time. But you still were faithful.
Right. Yeah. And like it was incredible the things that we started to build from there of just like, okay, everything up from here is luxury. Right? Like it's luxury. And we look back on that time and we don't look at it like, man, the struggle was hard. That was terrible. We look at it like, man, that was such enjoyable times. Do you remember when we didn't have the couch, and so we had a friend that gave us a blow-up mattress, and we would read and talk and things like that on the blow-up mattress in the living room when friends would come over.
That's good.
But there are other practical steps there. So, back then we would write the check for our tithes, and it was the worst thing in the world for me whenever I'm writing a check and something will happen. I'm on a youth retreat, something like that. But because my finances were so tight, like the next week would come and I would have forgotten to tithe for a week. Well, now that money just, it evaporates whenever it's in there and you're living paycheck to paycheck. And so I think one of the biggest gifts to me financially, and I think if anyone else struggles with this listening, that has been there, is giving online. Like the ability to say, hey, I want to be financially responsible in giving the first fruits to God so that I have to operate out of this 90% and just going, okay, I'm going to set this up for auto subscribe for my current tithe. And every single week, I know some people are like, no, you have to write the check. But for me, every single week when I get that email that goes, hey, your tithe has been processed, I'm like, man, thank you, God.
Yeah.
Like that is so, I'm so like overcome with gratitude, and like, man, it feels, I still get that feel good feeling, right?
Yeah, I do the same thing, and I know I struggled a little bit with like the mindset of like, is this really worshipful tithing if I'm not physically writing out the check and having to do it every week and be reminded of the act of doing it? But by the same token, I never count that money as mine. Right. Like it's just gone, and it doesn't belong to me. And I think that's an image of first fruits as well. Absolutely. And I think there's something about being good stewards of what God has given to us. And there's a little bit of that. I mean, there's some controversy. Like I know some people will say, well, you shouldn't give and then apply for that on your tax credit, or I don't know what the for charitable giving.
Yeah, for charitable giving, and I would disagree with that. I think like if God is generously giving to us, and then there is methods to be able to like make the money that He has given to us go further, and it doesn't hurt the church. Like, absolutely. Like that frees up more money to be able to give more, to be able to, apply for your needs, all of those kind of things. So whether it's with taxes or whether it's with using a credit card to pay your tithe, if you're paying that credit card off, don't go into debt.
Don't go into debt
doing it. But
that's not the heart of it.
Now, as a financially responsible person, I put all of my charges on credit cards, but I pay off my whole monthly balance every single month so that we make a few percentages back. But yeah, I think those things are good inside of it. The giving envelopes. I mean, that's whatever your jam is that you can faithfully give.
I think it's the heart in it, no matter what you do. Like if your heart is in it, God sees your heart in it. So even with like the whole tax conversation, because I know people have some really strongly held opinions about that. Like don't be looking to game the system.
Right.
Don't let your giving be an intention to game a system. Like let your giving be a thoughtful act of worship and returning that to God.
Yeah, the last thing that comes to my mind every single week when I give is, oh man, I can't wait to apply this on my tax credit. Right? You know what I mean? It's like I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I can do this. And so, yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's down to the heart.
Yeah, so the bottom line is just do it. Just try it.
Yeah.
I want to pivot real quick here too. So we started off the message on Sunday hearing an update via video about the Recovery Church campus and the Lighthouse.
That was awesome.
And we heard a story from Kyle, who is one of the guys in the Lighthouse. A really powerful testimony. I edited his video, so I know more than what was shared.
The bank robber.
There. It was, incredible story. I think I want to just park here for a second and talk about how that was made possible.
Yeah.
That story, everything we've done with recovery as a result of the giving that has come into our church. Not just financially or otherwise. Like it was acts of service and people giving their time and talent to it. The Lighthouse building itself, when it was purchased, was in need of significant remodeling to be habitable for those guys.
It's beautiful in there.
It is.
I want to move in.
Yeah, same. And it really just works out so perfectly for them there. I mean, it's a beautiful place to live. It is 2 doors down from the Sunbury campus. So those guys are all, walking to church together, and they have all the things that they need together. And it really provides this network of stability for them, which is exactly what they need in the situation that they are in. But I kind of want to talk about it from this angle of like, I think sometimes we look at what's going on in our world and a lot of the problems out there in the world, and there's a lot of causes that are out there to address it. Addiction is a big one that way. Like, I don't know, what comes to your mind about how like we as a church can meet the needs like that in our world, these kind of social problems that can't be solved easily and require money to meet the needs of it.
Right.
Like, what is the advantage that we have as a church have to meet those needs?
Yeah, it's really interesting too, because I think the church has taken more of a backseat with that in the last few hundred years. Mm-hmm. When you think about the foundations even of America, there were hospitals that were established by the church. There were schools, education that was established by the church. We had orphanages around to take care of different issues. So when these social issues were there around the country, the church, out of their generosity, is the one who stepped in. A great film to see is through Angel Studios right now. It's called Cabrini.
Okay.
It's awesome, and it follows one of the first nuns in the Catholic Church that went out to help establish orphanages and universities or not universities, but hospitals around the globe. It's a phenomenal film. But I think the church has operated in a way that benefits the social causes of the world through its generosity for thousands of years. I think we're just now getting back to that right now, and we see the evidence, the fruits of it that are inside of Recovery Church. With people who, literally without people giving, we wouldn't have been able to build those facilities.
Right, yeah.
And you have these people that are struggling with addiction, but if we consider that addiction to those substances, right, they're searching for this fulfillment that will never fulfill them, right? Yeah. It can only be they can only be truly fulfilled in Christ. And so the governmental systems there, they may get them to stop using, right? But what it tends to be is trading out one addiction for another addiction of some kind.
Right.
And so pointing them towards Jesus. I think that's why if you ever go to like a Recovery Church worship service, or something like that, or even when like those group of guys come up, or girls come up to the Milton campus and worship with us, you can see there's a genuine, like they recognize their need and dependence on God. Mm-hmm. And those people are people that a lot of times society gives up on in
Yeah,
general.
yeah.
You know? And so I think as the church, through our generosity in all these different areas, and the church globally, like we continue to do a better job of that than the world, right? Like there's a higher percentage of adoptions with Christians than there is with non-Christians. So like we're meeting needs, but I feel like we are not at where we once were, but I feel like the pendulum is swinging the other way now.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I think too, some of the hesitance that people have today with just giving is they want to know what the results are up front. And like, I think an advantage that we have here is like, regardless of any worldly results that may or may not happen as a result of anything we do, like your money could make an eternal difference as a result of giving, just meeting the needs of someone physically, speaking to their spirit, you know, and moving them towards closer to God, basically. Like, I don't think you can put a price tag on that. For sure. So I think, I don't know, I marvel every time I'm down at Sunbury watching a recovery service, thinking about, so the very first Friday night that we had service, I was down there taking some video and some stuff for projects just to see it. And I remember being there. It was only a handful of people, maybe I think between volunteers and people who showed up, maybe about 20 or so people. And then I was down there recently for a baptism service, and it was like no room at all. Yeah. Every seat taken, like you were sardined in that building. Man. So I think we had heard about it from Billy recently about how we're the second largest recovery church in the recovery church movement. Right. Like, and really, I think you said this right before we were recording. The only limitation on that is space. Space. There's literally no more room for people at that campus for it. So, like, I just look at everything that has happened over a very short period of time with that church, and can't help but be excited, you know, about what the future of that would be. Tremendous. Yeah. And I mean, there's ways and there's stories inside of there. Like I think people who give, and I think you hit on something really important. There is right now in this current generation a lack of trust with organizations like the church that we're going to spend money reasonably and responsibly. And one of the things I love about our church is we are absolutely continuing to move in a direction where we're doing that. I mean, you know, our facilities director this morning was just telling us, hey, let's make sure we turn off lights. Right. He was a gentle, and I got caught too, by the way. Immediately after that meeting, I forgot to turn the light off in the room, and he called me out on it. And I was just like, gosh darn it. It was like, hey, when we turn off the lights, we have more money to use in ministry. But, you know, a lot of our congregation doesn't know, like even within our benevolence, like I was on call a few weeks back, and a man was traveling through from Maine. He went to go bury his grandma, was on his way back, and his transmission went out, and it was just him and his dog. He was driving all the way to Idaho, and it was just him and his dog. And he spent all of his money on getting his transmission switched out, and then was like, I don't think I have enough gas money to get back. And so I met him over at the corner gas station, was able to pray for him and hear his story, and fill up his gas tank, and bought him a couple sandwiches so that he could share some with his dog, and all of those kind of things. But there are an organization our size, there's so many needs and ministries and things like that we're affiliated at in this community that are incredible. Our family life team just went down, and there's I want to make sure that I get it right, Kids Cafe, I think it is, in the Watsontown area. It's a local ministry area, and they invited us out to go pray over their first meal for the summer. And every single day in Watsontown, they give away meals to people who want to come and join and eat with them. So there's kids there and teenagers and families, and was just awesome. But to be able to step in and like see parts of the different ministries our church has their hand in is phenomenal, that most people don't even know about. You know? Yeah. Well, we're wrapping up the series, wrapping up our episode here. I know you had some stories you wanted to share about how generosity has been like a part of your life, both giving and receiving of it. Right. So take the floor. So, you know, I've been in the church since I was a teenager, gave my life to Christ, and have been had the opportunity many times to go to different countries, to go on missions trips, to go in relief areas, like down when Katrina came and blew out New Orleans, and
that area. I went to Pascagoula, Mississippi and helped rebuild houses. And I've been to the Navajo Indian reservations, like putting on roofs and helping to assist in those areas. We've been all over the place, helped in a number of different ways, Habitat for Humanity, all those things. And I recognize that like what we were doing was good. It was meeting a need for other people, but it also made me feel good, you know?
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was, my wife was pregnant with our first child, that really that generosity started to turn toward us in a way that was just life-changing. I mentioned this earlier, but after I graduated college, I had some credit card debt and a car payment that I had to have. Those things that were in there, and my wife and I were working, and there were multiple times where we said, hey, like if our car disappears in the middle of the night, it is probably not because someone stole it. It's because we're shuffling which bill which bill we're going to pay right now. And I look back and I'm like, how did we make it through, with all that? But God provided in the midst of all of it. And so we'd gotten to where we had just paid off our car. We'd paid off the credit card. And we were working really hard to be financially responsible and all of that. But now that we had a kid, we had this Honda Civic 2004, a two-door coupe. And if you have ever gotten a kid out of a car seat, reaching back into that Honda Civic is not going to be easy. And then you're also thinking, okay, I'm in Houston traffic, which is like 12 lanes of traffic.
Wow.
You're like, if I get hit by a semi, I want something that's going to be a little bit safer for my kid. But we also recognize like this is first world problems. You know, like, oh no, I'm so inconvenienced that I have to reach in the back of my personal automobile. And so we just decided, me and my wife, that we were going to pray for a month. We weren't going to tell anybody. We were just going to say, hey, God, like, if you could work out something where we could get some interest, because like the credit cards and all that, we just didn't have great credit, juggling all those bills for a while. God, would you do your thing, or would you just settle it in our hearts, And about 3 weeks into that, we go to a baby shower and people are getting us like crib blankets and all those things. And at the very end, there's a little box and someone said, oh, I just found this on the table. And we're like, oh, okay. And so we open it up and there's a key inside that said, find me outside. And literally what happened is we walked outside and there's no beeper on the key. So I'm like, oh man, I don't want to assume that like, like I could see like a Chevy symbol on there and I'm like, I don't want to assume like what it's going to be. And so I look over at the first Chevy and I start to put the key in and I hear someone go, that's my car. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm so embarrassed. Like, I can't believe that I just assumed that someone would give me this nice of a car. And so we go around the whole parking lot. We can't find the car anywhere. And someone said, well, didn't it go in that first one? And I went back and I turned the key and they had given us a Chevy Trailblazer.
Wow.
Just free and clear. There was a letter in there and everything that was like, hey, the only thing that we ask is that you never try to find out who we are. They had paid the registration.
No way.
They'd paid all the title fees. They'd paid everything and transferred it over to the dealership so that we just had to sign some papers.
Wow.
So it was super, super wild in the midst of all of that. And we drove that for a year. And after about a year, we were driving right past a Jack in the Box, which is like a fast food restaurant out there. And I tried to hit the gas and my car wasn't going anywhere. The transmission gave out on it. And I was like, oh man, I felt bad because someone else had gotten this car. And I'm like, okay, let's figure out how much it's going to cost to fix it, those kind of things. And I got a call that night from a church member and she said, hey, listen, I heard that your transmission went out. My husband just passed and we're not going to use his car anymore. We'd like to give it to you. And I was like, man, thank you. So, less than 24 hours, didn't tell anybody other than the guy that helped us to haul it out of there.
Yeah.
And she goes from there and we meet her at the church the next day and we're like, all right, where's the car? lo and behold, it's a 2014 Lexus RX 350. And so we're like, what on earth? Like, okay, the youth pastor's driving the Lexus.
Yeah.
We need to lower the salary or something. And so it was humbling in the way that was like, it was almost embarrassing to drive such a nice car around, but we were thankful for the gift that God had given to us through this sweet, sweet woman. And then when we moved up here, we sold that car to pay for the 2 cars that we currently drive. And so, well, I guess one of them I just replaced from an accident, but it's still the dividends of that generosity are continuing. Even though this is a decade ago, it's still almost a decade ago. It's still continuing right now.
Yeah,
which is phenomenal. And I think about another story. When my daughter was born, she had what's called a duodenal atresia. So part of her intestines were not opened up at all. And so she required life-saving surgery in her intestines to be able to allow food and nutrition and things like that to pass through. And it was something that they totally missed on ultrasounds, on anything up to that point. Was a miracle story in and of itself that my wife came to a full-term delivery without it, because it just made her continue to pump water weight up. But it was this crazy whirlwind because we had to be transferred down to Texas Children's Hospital, and that was about a 45-minute drive for us when there was no traffic. And in Houston, there's hardly ever no traffic.
Yeah.
So it can easily take 2-3 hours to get from where we were into downtown Houston, where Texas Children's Hospital was. And so we had members from the church congregation that turned in their airline miles and stuff like that and got us a few weeks at the hotel. And when those expired, someone else came in and they said, hey, my sister works there. We've got the friends and family discount. Like, it'll be $45 a night instead of $290 or whatever it was. And then we're like, okay, great. We can't afford $45 a night and our apartment still. And people from the congregation got together and they raised like $3,000 for us. Another lady from our old church mailed us $1,000 in gift cards so that we could pay for food while we were there. And then we had congregation members just showing up and giving us meals and hanging out with us. And we played games like Spoons and Old Maid and, like Go Fish, all these different types of things where it's like they're just there keeping us company while we're with our newborn daughter that we're unsure how this thing's going to go, for a little while. And so it was, it's totally different being on the inside. Like, your generosity can radically make an impact in changing the trajectory of someone's life, but also, like you were saying with Recovery Church, with someone's eternity, right? Mm-hmm. Like, that spoke, that even just the dregs of that story that continue on now, like they say something about the body of Christ to my daughter. Mm-hmm. Right? Who from her very first days here were marked by the generosity of the body of Christ. Mm-hmm. And, being able to tell that story, over and over and over and over. I think about the cars, in the midst of all that. First of all, we weren't swallowed in debt from the hospital, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Then the cars, that even to this day, like, because my wife wasn't an American citizen when we got married, I had to sign away all of my my rights to like welfare, to food stamps, to any of those kind of things. So those early days when we were struggling, there was no government assistance, there was no government help, and so we were just surviving on our own. And so we felt like, especially with being a pastor and a pastoral family, like not having your in-laws in the area, that's tough.
Yeah.
You don't have anyone there to assist and to, okay, we're going to babysit tonight. We're going to help you out with this. So it's like, we could never afford to go on date nights. Yeah. We were swallowed up in just debt and trying to survive and paycheck to paycheck. That one thing of someone going, hey, we're going to bless you with this car. And here's this, eventually this car that could help buy 2 cars, out of it. We were able to kind of take where we were socioeconomically, and just go, okay, now we have just a couple of breaths,
Yeah.
Like where we could really go, okay, how can we continue to be generous with what we have? How can we now we could take someone out to lunch instead of like, want to come over to my house for curry tuna?
Ramen noodles.
They don't even sell that at Trader Joe's anymore. Yeah, man, it was wonderful. We had a lot of them. Or $1 Big Macs. Big Macs, I wouldn't recommend them for health, but
right.
At
hey, but they got you by.
Yeah, at the one right behind our university, they had $1 Big Macs. That was their thing, and so we're like, okay, we just need to survive.
Yeah.
So,
I think your story just highlights how much we just need each other.
Yes,
and that's the reality of generosity. Like, we can meet each other's needs in a very tangible way, and that in turn allows us to continue to meet other people's needs, and then meet these big picture needs in our community and in our world. It all happens because of just making that decision to be faithful.
That's right.
At one important juncture, just to be faithful as God is prompting you to do it. And I know, like, we've had stories of people even here who have just like, I wasn't quite sure why God was telling me to do this, but I did it, and I gave this person some money, and then they immediately just told me their life story about how just this one day I found myself in need of this one specific thing, and you showed up. Like unbelievable stories like that.
And I think it's so cool because God knows, like, we know our story, right? And we may know a little bit about someone else's story, but our perspective is so limited, right? And God sees all of our stories and how they intertwine with each other. And so there are so many of those cool God moments where you're like, okay.
Yeah, come on.
Okay, guys, show off.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's really cool. I'm thankful for that we spent these 4 weeks on the series talking about it, because I know in the church talking about money and finances this way can be so difficult, because it's all, we only want your money, the church is obsessed with money, all those negative things that you hear that way. But just like Pastor Brandon shared, it has such an ability to hold our hearts and hold our attention, and that's why God cared about it. And that's why I know for me, I'll be thinking a lot about what we talked about over the past few weeks moving forward. But that wraps up our series on overflow, on generosity. I gotta plug the 90-day challenge one more time, because I feel like Brandon's been plugging it. We've been talking about it a lot, so just try it. I know we're not gonna hit it as hard talking about all that moving forward, but definitely be thinking about those sorts of things that you can be doing moving forward. And then next Sunday is Pastor Mike's final Sunday with us. So, man,
I heard there's like cake.
I'm sure there's something.
Oh, come next week and find out.
Yeah, and then we'll get to hear from him one last time too on Dive Deep here. So
that's awesome.
Be on the lookout from that. I'm so excited for what God has in the future for Mike too, and what he's moving into. So we'll miss him here, but
I'm glad he's local.
Yes, same. He's just down the road.
Yep. I think his girls are still coming to Meadowbrook, so we'll see him even around.
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you guys next week.
See ya.